1967, Canada's centennial year, the Kinsmen Club of Edson was looking around for a project for the club that would be worthy of the centennial celebrations. Historically, the town of Edson, located on the Grand Trunk Pacific Railroad, was the staging area for thousands of settlers and pioneers who came to Edson by rail, then traveled north with their wagon trains and ox carts, and even some walked 265 miles north to claim their homesteads in the rich soil of the Peace River country. This trail through the wilderness, across several rivers and streams, through many miles of sucking muskeg and tall timber, became widely known as the Grande Prairie Trail. There were no bunkhouses, stables, or watering holes along the way. And making this trek was an ordeal long remembered by all the settlers and the pioneers, even though they had used it only once. The trail was used as the shortest and most convenient route to the Peace River country until 1922, when railway service was established to Grande Prairie. But back to my epic story. In 1967, the trail had not been used for 50 years and was overgrown and hardly distinguishable from the wilderness that had reclaimed it. No matter, a kinsman named Thomas Bushman Brown hatched an idea which quickly caught fire with the Edson Club. Why not attend the district convention in Grande Prairie on June the 3rd, 1966, by taking a pack train from Edson through the historic and famous Grande Prairie Trail to Grande Prairie, a distance of 265 miles. The club began accepting volunteers. 7 kinsmen volunteered, all of whom you will meet later in the movies of the trip. The plan was to organize a packed train in Edson to take the trekkers to the Athabasca River, where they would be met by boat from the Kinsmen Club of Hinton, a neighboring club, and then after crossing the river they would join up with John Ostashik and his pack train from Brule, which would then take them across the many rivers, the Little Smoky, and many streams, and through the muskeg to attend the convention in Grande Prairie. All of which required a lot of organization and also a lot of cash. A $50 plate dinner was organized in the town of Edson, which was well attended by all the citizenry. And there were skits presented at the dinner, as long as some promotional songs, one of which I propose to sing to you. But you must remember that this song really requires the full-throated support of 7 kinsmen to have its desired effect. But for the lack of availability of the other 6 kinsmen at this time, I will attempt to carry the ball. Back in 1910, when men were men and the drive was on to the great Northwest, to Edson they came in the snow and rain, and they traveled north where the land was best. And we're glad to say we made our way, retraced those steps from another day, when the trail was long and the men were strong, and they traveled north to Grande Prairie town. Mosquitoes and black flies filled the air, and the rivers and creeks did overflow. The mud was deep with no place to sleep, when north they went their new land to sow. And we're glad to say we made our way, retraced those steps from another day, when the trail was long and the men were strong, and they traveled north to Grande Prairie town. We salute the past and those hardy men, aye, traveling that long tough trail again. Without their toil, their sweat, their tears, we would not have enjoyed our prosperous years. And we're glad to say we made our way, retraced those steps from another day, when the trail was long and the men were strong, and they traveled north to Grande Prairie town. Anyone who knows me would know that I wouldn't stop at just one song. So here's another little ditty we used at the skit in the $50 plate dinner in Edson before our departure to encourage the community support. Men of Edson in the saddle, here we come with horse and paddle to ride again the historic trail, Edson to Grande Prairie, through Muskeg and Wild River, in any kind of weather. Those hardy men of yesteryear never ever thought of failure. Onward 'tis our history leads us, we will go if you will feed us. To ride again the historic trail, Edson to Grande Prairie.
This is your roving reporter, Lorne Knobby Kroetch, again reporting to you. The first night following our send-off from the town of Edson, we camped at mile 21 on the Grande Prairie Trail. It was really mile 21 Creek, and many supporters from the town of Edson drove out to join us in our barbecue and celebrations that we were finally on the trail. It snowed the following day, but we finally arrived at the Athabasca River. We had some difficulty in locating the boats which had come from Hinton to pick us up and take us across the river. But with the aid of our rifles and with yoo-hooing and calling, we finally located the boats. We bid farewell to John Hackett, who had ridden the Grande Prairie Trail when it was actually in use, and who was our trail boss up to that point. Bid farewell to him and his wranglers, who were to take the pack train, which we had used up to that point, back to the town of Edson. Threw our saddles and our bedrolls and our gear into the boats that had come from Hinton, and they took us across the Athabasca River, where we camped that evening. In the morning, we were all introduced to our new steeds, which had come from Brule, and were told to make up our own lunches. A hot meal would be provided in the evening when the day's ride was over. When we were told to mount up, Gallopin Grant noticed that his horse had eaten his lunch. Gallopin Grant said very philosophically, "Why shouldn't he eat my lunch? He does all the work." Anyway, needless to say, we shared our lunch that day on the trail. On the morning of May the 24th, we were saddling up and loading the pack animals when a plane flew low over our campsite and dropped a message which read, "Have the camera and the booze. Can meet you at Marshhead Airstrip. White for yes, any other color for no." Now, booze is a very important commodity to keep up the morale in a group such as our trekkers, and of course in the treatment of snakebite. So everyone scrambled to find what little remained that was white on the pack train. But when the plane returned and flew again over the camp, it was clear he got the right message. Now, we had passed Marshhead's airstrip the previous afternoon, so it was some 5 or 6 miles behind us, and this presented a bit of a problem. The trail boss said that the pack train must move on to keep our schedule, but that he would allow 2 of us with our horses to return to the Marshhead airstrip
pick up the camera and the booze, and that they would, after meeting with the aircraft, would have to catch up to the pack train as best they could. I couldn't stand the long silence, so I offered to return to Marshhead to pick up the booze and camera. Jingo Joy, who was at that time in training as an undertaker, said he thought this undertaking sounded much like a suicide mission. So he felt professionally bound to join Knobby. So off we went, and the pack train continued on. We met with Bart Kiefler, who was the pilot of the aircraft, picked up the booze and the camera, turned our steeds around to catch up to the pack train. I noticed that the trail at this point had made a very definite U-turn, and I thought if we chose to travel across the open end of the U, we could save some time and catch up sooner to the pack train. Jingo Joy, to his credit, was against this maneuver. But I persisted, and off we went. And I cautioned Jingo to keep his horse a safe distance behind my horse, so that in the event that I got into some kind of difficulty, we would at least have one horse to rescue us. And into trouble, I soon found myself. Suddenly my horse, Diamond, sunk in the muskeg up to his belly, and my feet in stirrups were resting on the surface of the muskeg. I called to Jingo to tether his horse, and he came over to help. Diamond, who I mentioned was a strong horse, just struggled a few times in the muskeg and then seemed to give up. But Jingo and I were not prepared to give up. We found some logs and placed them under Diamond's feet. We tied a lasso to Diamond's halter and tied it to a tree so that he would have something to pull on, some purchase. We put a nerve line on the horse and even bit his ear to get him to struggle, to attempt to get up. And finally, he was able to get up when we very cautiously backed him back onto the trail. It crossed my mind at that time, if we had not been able to get Diamond out of the muskeg, how it would have jeopardized the whole Grande Prairie trek. Anyway, we finally got old Diamond extricated and returned to the trail, and needless to say, I didn't try any other shortcuts that afternoon. When we finally caught up with the pack train, it was late afternoon, and the pack train was in utter disarray. Two of the pack animals were down in the muskeg, and their loads were scattered all over the trail. Our pack horse, Rhubarb, was in particularly bad shape, and the 7 trekkers rose to the occasion and eventually virtually carried Rhubarb out of the muskeg to high ground, where she rested for a long while. We eventually moved on and arrived at the Little Smoky, where we made camp, enjoyed some of the booze that we had picked up from Bart Kiefler, made a makeshift baseball diamond, played some ball, did some stand-up wrestling, and generally relaxed. Now, at the Little Smoky, the trail boss, Joe Grote, had other things than fun and games on his mind. He knew there should be a bridge somewhere near the Little Smoky, and he sent Cordite Chiesa and Bushman Brown downstream to look for the bridge. And he took a horse. In fact, it was Diamond, who was already under considerable stress, and went upstream to look for the bridge. They all returned at 11 o'clock p.m., saying that there was no bridge to be found. It appeared that we would have to swim the Little Smoky in the morning. As trail boss said, no problem. All you do is lead your horse into the water, face him to the opposite shore, kick him in the ass, grab his tail, and hang on. Needless to say, a few of the trekkers had a very sleepless night. In the morning, we crossed the Little Smoky without too much difficulty. But on the opposite bank, because the river was high because of spring melt, was an oozing muskeg with sharp beaver cutting stumps protruding. Some of the pack animals strayed a bit downstream, but finally got them on the far shore. One of the pack animals, ironically named Smoky, became snagged on one of these beaver cuttings, struggled, and soon bled to death. We unpacked him, and each of the riders agreed to carry some part of his load. Now, a pack animal is very important to travelers such as these trekkers were, because the pack animal carries their food, their gear, their bedrolls, and all the equipment. So this was a very disappointing turn of events for all the trekkers. And after they abandoned poor Smoky and proceeded on the trail, they continued on in silence for probably 10 or 15 minutes. Finally, the silence was broken by our trail boss, who said in his wry humor, "I sure hope we don't lose another horse, or we'll have to shoot a rider." That seemed to break the ice, and the mood of the trekkers improved after that. The following morning there was a great stir in the corral where the horses were kept, for in fact Pet, one of the pack animals, had foaled, and the other horses were very excited about this occasion. The colt was a little Appaloosa, and we called him Trekker. Well, after 10 days in the wilderness between Edson and Grande Prairie, we finally made camp about 3/4 of a mile south of Highway 43, which links Valley View to Grande Prairie. The Kinsmen and Knetts from Sturgeon Heights, which was the closest Kinsmen Club, came out and joined us, bringing food and drink, and stayed to enjoy our campfire. By this time, the 7 greenhorn dudes which had left Edson had become hardened wranglers. And they all rode their horses like they were part of them. What part of them was often a great subject of discussion. Since we were 1 day ahead of schedule, the wrangler decided we could take an afternoon off, and we stopped near the hamlet of Topott and went into the bar there, where we met Susie Running Shoes and several ladies of the local ladies club. Gave us polished stones to commemorate our trek. And in the evening we went on to Crystal Creek Hall, where the kinsmen of Grande Prairie set up a dinner for us, and we met several farmers in the Grande Prairie area who had gone on the Grande Prairie Trail only once, when they went from Edson to Grande Prairie to claim their farmsteads in that area, which was very interesting to us. The following day, we rode into Grande Prairie and were met there by the Grande Prairie Club, all dressed in Arab costumes and riding motorcycles. And they escorted us to the center part of the city of Grande Prairie, where they had made up a temporary hitching post in front of the York Hotel, where we tied up our trusty steeds and went in for refreshments, of course. The following night, the Chamber of Commerce and the mayor and councillors had set up a dinner for us at the Park Hotel, where we were all presented with certificates commemorating the horseback trip between Edson and Grande Prairie. Following that, we enjoyed the convention, which was sponsored by the Grande Prairie Zone. But following the convention, we were all quite content to ride back to our city of Edson in a Mustang with 4 wheels, instead of riding our horses back, which were shipped back by truck. That was the end of a very interesting trip for all of us, I'm sure.